This easy. It's right here. I don't have a kosher phone. And this is the reality for most of the world. So this adds a layer of complexity and a demand for a certain discipline that didn't exist before. To undo that, to reprogram yourself, to enjoy something else, to be okay with subtlety, to be okay with reality is an extremely difficult thing to do. It's common sense that warping your head into fantasy every week, multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day is not a good thing, right? It can't be effective. You masturbate, work yourself up, work your energy up, all that energy, euphoria, dopamine, all that circulating through your body as you're fantasizing. And then you not just release it up here, you release it down there and you're ejecting it from your body. What do you think that does? Physically, not spiritually. What do you think it does physically to you? You know what it does because you know how you feel after you masturbate. You feel like shit. So somebody who's a chronic masturbator and wastes their seed all the time is somebody who's low energy, just subpar amongst other masculine men. You waste your seed, you're essentially turning yourself into a beta male by your own actions. Nobody's asking you to. You could be up here in the social hierarchy, you're putting yourself here. And you know it, you feel it. When you walk into the room after you drained your energy, how do you feel? So the second issue with masturbation is simply all this energy that you need for life to carry out your mission, you're wasting on fantasy. A garbage truck driver pulls up and throws out of his window a torn page out of a pornography magazine. I'm 11, 12 years old. I've never seen a woman naked. You have to understand that every variable is a real variable that you're going to have to deal with to help navigate you out of this issue. These issues are so complex, it will take you years to navigate. You have to be a certain age, a certain level of maturity. You have to go through certain experiences. You have to hate it so much more than you enjoy it. There are so many stages that you need to go through, but it can be done. By relearning sex, you have to be willing to come off that peak euphoria that you're used to, learn something more subtle and realistic, and then you can find true joy and pleasure and happiness and all of the above within that realm. Welcome to the HumbleBrag Podcast. My name is Mendel, and in this episode, we are going to talk about male sexuality. So ladies, run along. I'm kidding. Stay if you'd like, but I'm going to touch on masturbation, semen retention, personal holiness, pornography, and sex, as well as some other phenomena that surround and encompass the manosphere. So now that you've been forewarned, let's jump right in. First of all, don't get any ideas. I know I've been away for 7 months and I haven't recorded, but during that 7-month period, I have not turned gay on you. This is not me coming out of the closet. My daughter actually put this necklace on me, and I thought that in the spirit of the holidays and the new year, we could spice things up for you. I'm still very much straight, and I support all males following that orientation. Okay, so what's the deal with this topic? Obviously, and in general, this topic is quasi-sensitive and quasi-taboo globally. Adding to that the notion of being a religious Jew, there's an extra layer of secrecy and awkwardness that surrounds it. I've never been one to shy away from sensitive topics. I feel blessed to have learned self-expression from a really young age. I actually learned it from my grandmother when I was sent out of the community at a really young age. I was about 14. She taught me what it means to express yourself and be open. And I attribute my ability to speak openly about not just my experiences, but about anyone's experiences on any topic to her, as well as other life experiences that I've had. So I never fully connected, but I can understand why people shy away from certain topics. This is obviously one of those types of topics. Not many people will talk about it. Those who struggle with it, though, and there are many, will research perhaps or bump into videos online that touch on these things. So let's explore this with an open mind and shed away some of the shame that might come along with it. Here's the reality. Pornography, sex, porn and sex addiction, fetishes, fantasy, and everything in that category is reality. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish, not Jewish, religious, not religious. It's something that a large portion of men deal with and even struggle with, hence this conversation. If it was a non-topic, if it was non-relevant, nobody would need to talk about it. It is relevant, and it's more relevant than you may imagine. For Jewish people, especially religious Jews who didn't grow up with proper sex education, didn't grow up with speaking about or being educated about sex in any which way, certainly not from a healthy angle, the topic is even tougher and even harder, and there's a lot of shame that's involved in it. So many people don't speak about their struggles openly. That notwithstanding, the rabbis, the educators, the yeshivas, they're constantly and consistently pushing for personal holiness. Personal holiness, essentially guarding the covenant or protecting the covenant referring to your private parts, the foundation, is so rampant. So on the one hand, we don't speak about these things openly, the struggle that's behind that veil. But on the other hand, we are constantly alluding to and speaking about personal holiness in that area that we can't talk about. The struggle of masturbation, wasting seed, being lustful, occupying yourself in fantasy and in sex and everything in that criteria is significant enough that every yeshiva, every school, certainly in the religious world, puts a huge emphasis on trying to inspire students not to go down that road. Of course, they don't do so openly, right? They don't speak about it in the way that I'm speaking about it right now, but they do so in covert terms. And growing up in that, you come to understand exactly what's being discussed, what's being pushed for, but it wouldn't be pushed so persistently if it wasn't a problem, if we weren't dealing with a very significant reality that needs to be addressed, right? If it was just a few students, a few yeshiva bachrim, a few young adults dealing with this, if it was 1% or 2%, you could have those conversations in private. The reason it's literally almost a part of education is because it's a reality. Obviously, it's not just a reality in the Jewish world. It's a global reality. But growing up in the Jewish world, especially if you grew up ultra-Orthodox, there is a couple additional layers of complication when it comes to this topic, and we'll discuss it. So this conversation is for anyone to learn more about the ins and outs of this topic, how to deal with it, potential solutions, so on and so forth. But it's even more so for people who grew up Jewish, because there's even more complexity and nuance with regards to that category, that group of people. I fall into that group. I grew up ultra-Orthodox. I went to Hasidic schools, was taught nothing, learned everything on my own. And having grown, evolved, and healed, I have a clear understanding and perspective of what that has done, what the exposure and the way that I learned about sex has done, and how it all affected me. Therefore, I'm able to talk about it. The desire to be with a woman, to have sex, is not new. Obviously, it's the oldest struggle for men. Even in Jewish literature and religious texts, we see that some of our forefathers, some of the biggest names we look up to, slept with prostitutes or women off the street. It appears that if you understand history, the desire for women is a background theme of every period. It never didn't exist. The way in which people engaged in it and reacted toward it morphed, and it morphs as society changes, but it's always been there. And it's no different in our times. However, there is something that has changed in our times, specifically in the past, I guess, about 30 years, maybe 40 years, and that's technology. However bad your struggle was, your fantasies were, your desire for women was, in the past, you still had to physically go out and pursue. With the advancement of technology, it started out with cassettes and then DVDs, and now streaming, that introduced an entirely new layer, combined with modern pornography, that the person who fantasizes or the person who struggles could simply, back then it was like buy a DVD or a cassette, and now it's just jump online and see what you want to see, essentially feed your fantasy, and you could get yourself off to it and then repeat that cycle a million times over. So that particular aspect didn't exist in the past, which made the struggle back then a little bit more tenable, perhaps manageable, because the fact is when you don't have what you are feeling within arm's reach, you factually stay away from it much more. when you do have access to what you're feeding, like an alcoholic having a bottle next to them, you will fall for it over and over again. So technology and the internet, we first and foremost must understand, has made this challenge an even bigger challenge. We learned so much in Jewish ethics, how to behave, what is or isn't right in terms of pursuing women and sex. And it almost feels unrealistic when you compare that and you contrast that with the reality of how many people fell through in the past in that particular department. Add to that the layer of technology, the accessibility. If I want to get off right now, if I want to go into fantasy land, masturbate, and waste my seed, all I have to do is punch in a couple keystrokes and boom, this easy. It's right here. I don't have a kosher phone. And this is the reality for most of the world. So this adds a layer of complexity and a demand for a certain discipline that didn't exist before. Perhaps before you had fantasy, you had desires. It was all up here. Most people couldn't do anything about it. Living in a small town, somewhere in the boondocks, this, that, the other, didn't go anywhere. For many people it did, of course, those who had the opportunity and the means, absolutely. But for your layman, perhaps not. These days, it's on the phone. And of course, the phone leads to other outlets because you could swipe, you can meet up with people much easier, so on and so forth, if you're looking for that. So we factually find ourselves in an era that has the most accessibility and demands the most discipline to try to counter and fight. I'm saying that to build you up. I want you to understand how immensely strong and what level of self-control ethics demands of us in our era. That level of self-control, I don't think existed, nor was there a need for it back in the day. You always have to look at the positive, and I do think that that's a positive. When you want to look at what we have accomplished in our times, it's very easy to criticize the modern age, how weak people are. They don't have a backbone, and they're lacking intelligence, and they lack the wherewithal to pay attention and to sit through a video that's more than a minute long. 90% of the people who clicked on this video already closed it and didn't get to this point. There's so much to criticize, but there's also a lot of positive. And in this particular sense, I believe it's one of the positives. One of the good points is that our society demands a certain discipline, a certain level of accountability. Okay, so we established the premise that there is hovering above the entire topic. There is one layer that makes it worse than everything, and that's the era that we live in because of the onslaught of technology. Now, I'm not knocking technology. I believe this is all part of the divine plan. You can never take God, Hashem, out of the picture because clearly Hashem wanted the world to evolve in this particular way. He wants us to be challenged in this particular notion, and he wants us to somehow overcome it, which for somebody stooped in addiction and fantasy and masturbation and wasting seed, you might find unrealistic, but there is a way. The key is not to give up, no matter how much it might feel like it's a losing battle. There actually is a solution. For every person, I think the solution might be different. I'll actually touch on some of those potential solutions shortly, but do understand that through spirituality and closeness to God and personal prayer, you could very likely find a solution for yourself. Age plays into it. I believe that 18, 20, and 25-year-old will have a much harder time trying to implement the solution. And that ties into the biology of how we feel at that age physically versus how you feel at 30, 35, 40, and 50. But don't give up. And perhaps that is part of the journey. Going through that struggle when you're younger, finding a solution when you're older. In general, 18-year-olds are not really having these conversations. It's people who matured, found a solution, somehow got past it, that are typically having these conversations. All right, now let's separate and describe the issues as distinct parts. Pornography is an addiction and an issue of its own. Masturbation and subsequently wasting seed is a separate issue. It happens to be one complements the other. If you masturbate and fantasize and waste your seed, and then you're introduced to technology that could help you fantasize, the pornography will feed your masturbation addiction. What's the problem with that? There's a couple problems with it. Some of them are religious by nature. Others are practical, physical, and scientific. For example, One problem with pornography is that it destroys the brain. I believe there's a website called yourbrainonporn.net or .org or whatever. You can look it up. Yourbrainonporn.something. That website will educate you on what pornography does to the brain. Very similar and no different than most drugs, cocaine. It's an addiction. You feed that addiction. You subsequently feed the act of doing it, engaging in it. And it's a nasty, nasty cycle. For some people, it becomes chronic. They spend hours, they spend money, and so many other things. It's a very, very destructive habit. No different than being addicted to a Class A substance. Another problem with pornography is that it conditions your brain to a certain and specific understanding of what sex, lovemaking, and intimacy is. And that understanding, most of the time, probably like 99.9% of the time, with rare exception, is completely detached from reality. In reality, intimacy, sex, making love, and all of the above does not play out the way that you see it on your screen. The conditioning, therefore, is extremely harmful. Why? Because most people engaging in watching pornography are young, don't have a girlfriend or a spouse. Now, I'm not saying that people with girlfriends and spouses don't look at porn. That's not true at all. I don't know the numbers offhand, but it's certainly less. The fact is, if you have somebody that you're having sex with, you will go on pornography less. People who are addicted to it go on it anyway, but certainly less. And being that that's the case, when you don't have a partner and you are watching porn every week, multiple times a week, every day, multiple times a day for some, you're conditioning your brain to think about sex a certain way, but not just to think about, to respond to the notion of sex a very particular way, and it's an unrealistic way. And then what do you think happens? Well, you probably already know. When you're talking to that girl, when you're having sex, when you're attempting to have sex or share an intimacy, it's nothing like it. And then there's a disconnect. There's all kinds of stuff that's associated with it. Shame, disappointment, dissatisfaction, confusion about your orientation. Remember we started with, confusion about your orientation. Okay, so we're just mentioning two problems just with pornography alone. Then there's practical issues. It becomes addictive. It's an addiction. You rely on it to feel good. People often do it just to feel better, just like you go out for a cigarette or smoke some weed or sniff some cocaine. You go watch porn, it makes you feel good for a few minutes. You get off. So you're just training your brain that, like, if I'm bored, I don't know what to do. If I am depressed and I'm not happy, if my spouse or girlfriend made me dissatisfied or unhappy, I'll just, go to porn, yank my chain, feel euphoric for a few minutes, and that's what I continue to do my entire life. For some people, it becomes chronic. They spend money on it. They pay for subscriptions. OnlyFans, I don't know tons about it, but I understand the premise of it. And there are OnlyFans models who make millions of dollars, which means that people are either paying subscriptions or they're gifting them. I don't know exactly. I've never been on the site to understand how the model works, but I could understand as a technology person how it works. So I know that for many people, they go down this rabbit hole of even destroying their finances over pornography, over fantasy, over, let's just call it sex that is not realistic, whether it's digital sex, fantasy, or anything besides for, in person. Now, there's a term called, I believe, sexual imprinting. Now, when you have improper sexual imprinting, what is sexual imprinting? Essentially, it is the things in your early childhood that taught you about what sex is and how that is imprinted on your mind, essentially. Meaning, for every person, sex is slightly different. For somebody who grows up, let's say, in a household with TV, and they watch a lot of romance, and their parents are open about sex, and they might grow up to understand sex as this beautiful romantic thing, okay? Somebody who grows up in a, trailer trash type of home, and sex is spoken about openly in a very demeaning way or something like that, they're going to grow up to feel and understand sex in a completely different way. Nothing romantic about it, let's say. So sexual imprinting is essentially how you were imprinted, how you learned and understand sex from your early childhood. If or when you are exposed to pornography from a young age, before your brain fully matured, what do you think that does to you? That gives you improper sexual imprinting. And that sticks with you almost your entire life unless you completely rewrite it, so to speak, rewrite your print. You have to essentially relearn sex. And that's a very difficult thing to do when you've indulged for many years growing up. Let's say you're 18, you start having sex, or you watch a lot of pornography and you waste your seed. You are essentially training yourself to feel good about something, that interaction is what pleasure is, so on and so forth. To undo that, when you realize that your behavior is destructive, because you've been doing it for 5, 10, 15 years, depending on your age at the time of this realization, to undo that, to reprogram yourself, to enjoy something else, to be okay with subtlety, to be okay with reality, is an extremely difficult thing to do. So by engaging in this addiction, you're effectively making your future extremely difficult for yourself. Granted, you're a person that appreciates health and will want to heal from all of this and move past it and so on and so forth. Many people live and interact with the sex topic in this manner their entire life and they never fix it. That is a route, but it's not for everyone. Okay, so sexual imprinting is a very important phenomenon to understand. So we discussed 3 or 4 different issues just with pornography itself. Before we move to wasting seed and masturbation, let me just touch on one extra layer on the pornography side, which is if you're a religious Jewish person. And that has some other ethical issues that surround modesty, that surround monogamy, that surrounds coveting. So it's not just physically bad for you, pornography. It's not just a bad physical addiction. It's not just draining and all this different stuff in so many different ways. It's also religiously bad for you. In other words, spiritually bad for you. Because ethics essentially teaches us how to live a healthy life spiritually. If we follow morality and ethics as laid out by our sages, we are effectively living a rich spiritual life, which in turn leads to a rich physical life. So there's a whole nother layer on the pornography side, which is if you're a Jewish person, you're infringing on a number of different ethical issues. Okay, but now let's move to masturbation, wasting seed, and personal holiness. Before we talk about the religious or Jewish side of it, let's just talk about the practical side again. Obviously, there's the issue of addiction, bad habit, similar to pornography. It's common sense that warping your head into fantasy every week, multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day, is not a good thing, right? It can't be effective. You can't be an effective husband, business leader, go-getter, or somebody accomplishing what they need to accomplish in life if every couple hours, every day, or whatever your frequency is, you take a break and you say, I'm now going to go into fantasy land. And let's just say pornography is not even part of the equation, just masturbation and fantasy alone. Okay, so just on the basis of being a successful human being, it's not a good thing. Now, granted, some people don't care about being effective and successful, meaning they're so stooped in their habits that they've accepted a certain lifestyle of laziness and, just it is what it is. This is who I am. This is what I need to do. Well, that brings us to the second issue, which is that wasting seed is draining. It literally drains you of energy. And this is not a religious thing. It's a physical thing. You masturbate, work yourself up, work your energy up, all that energy, euphoria, dopamine, all that circulating through your body as you're fantasizing. And then you not just release it up here, you release it down there. You're taking all that energy that you built up and you're ejecting it from your body. What do you think that does? Physically, not spiritually. What do you think it does physically to you? You know what it does because you know how you feel after you masturbate. You feel like shit. You feel drained. You feel like going to sleep. And the references to this being the case is age old. It's in ancient text. After sex, after ejaculation, you feel tired, you feel sleepy, you're weakest. That's when I imagine there would be a whole page in the art of war when to attack your enemy. Okay, these things are well known. It's not just holy people that practice NoFap, the modern term for not masturbating, or better yet, semen retention. It's not just holy people and rabbis and monks and all kinds of religious people that practice that. Athletes practice it. Do you know that many of the biggest athletes, and they've spoken about this, you can research this, the Muhammad Ali types, they don't have sex or masturbate days, possibly weeks leading up to big fights. Why not? What do they know that we don't know? It drains your energy. It makes you weaker. So somebody who's a chronic masturbator and wastes their seed all the time is somebody who's low energy, just subpar amongst other masculine men. You waste your seed, you're essentially turning yourself into a beta male by your own actions. Nobody's asking you to. You could be up here in the social hierarchy, you're putting yourself here. And you know it, you feel it. When you walk into the room after you drained your energy, how do you feel? So the second issue with masturbation is simply all this energy that you need for life to carry out your mission, to do and to get done what you need to get done, you're wasting on fantasy. You're wasting in the bedroom or the bathroom. So it makes no sense. Why would you do something that drains you over and over again? On the flip side, if you're a motivated person, you're going to gym, you're trying to be strong and healthy, and then you go home and waste it all? Makes no sense. Those are the two big issues without even touching on ethics, Jewish values, mysticism, and other stuff that allude to it. There's one more layer of issue with it, which is, I don't even know how to describe it, but being addicted to a certain body part, building up a fetish around it to the point where you have a type of relationship with it is very physically low, meaning it's very animalistic. So even outside of the realm of Jewish philosophy, if you're just somewhat of a spiritual person, if you're somewhat of an intellect, if you believe that humans have a divine spark, meaning we're more than just an animal, we're more than just a gorilla humping in the wild. If you believe that we're meant for something more special, something more divine, by behaving that way, that habit of masturbation, you're essentially pulling yourself back to a very animalistic state. It's the same thing I say about the obsession that society, that our society has with the size of your genitalia. I always found that so baffling. Just a few hundred years ago, at least in the times of the Romans, after, when they had statues of naked men with small packages, why was that? Back then it was understood that intellects didn't have big packages. Now, obviously we understand these days that there's not necessarily a correlation, but it shows you that what we idolize as a society speaks to our level on the intellectual and spiritual totem pole. Meaning to say, if we're in a society that obsesses over the size of the male penis, then that tells you that we're in a society that has something to a certain physical low. We're not so spiritual. We're not so intellectual. We're not so intelligent in that sense. See what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but how unique we want to be as humans, how divine, how elevated we want to be as humans, as a society, is up to us and our behavior. If we obsess over the size of the male package, or if we celebrate and promote the notion of beating your meat 5 times a week and building fetishes around parts of the human body, that simply lowers us to a more physical and animalistic level. And by the way, it's not just male. The obsession of female body parts and the clothes that they sell these days to accentuate certain parts, the butt, the chest, but not just that, the obsession around it, the fact that it becomes mainstream and fashion. That is a testament to a certain degraded state of society as a whole. So for me, when I analyze that, I just think to myself, How animalistic do I want to be? Or how godly and spiritual do I want to be? The notion of carving out time of your day to pleasure yourself by masturbating using a part of your body doesn't feel very godly, it's certainly very animalistic and very physical. For some, that might mean absolutely nothing, and I respect that, or I could say I understand that. But for me, it means something. And this speaks to many aspects of our life. How do we want to live? Because if we're going to be animalistic, there's no end. If we're going to be special, we're going to be different, we're going to be intelligent, we're going to be spiritual, then there are rules around that. And that segues us into the rules that Judaism has created around this topic for this very specific reason. In Judaism, we believe that we are special and that we are different and that we are literally a spark of Hashem, a spark of God. Our essence, our soul is a piece of God. And so we want to emulate God. God is holy. God is pure. That's why we call it personal holiness, protecting the Brit, the foundation, your personal parts. In English, essentially, the term is personal holiness. And there's a huge emphasis in the Jewish world on that, most specifically in the Orthodox, certainly ultra-Orthodox world. Why? Because there are many teachings in Jewish literature, most specifically derived from Kabbalistic text, but many others that emphasize the importance of personal holiness. Even more so, it explains what happens when we waste our seed. What happens is then you have generations of young Jewish, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox children growing up with these teachings that it's one of the most important things is to retain your personal holiness. But they're growing up in a modern society, like I said, with this, and they are essentially being pushed what feels like an unrealistic undertaking to remain holy, to guard their Brit, to protect their personal holiness. So this is a real conundrum, is it not? How do you have tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews being told, don't touch your personal parts, don't look at women, don't fantasize, don't masturbate, don't waste your seed, don't have sex until you're married, you get married when you're 18 plus. Is that realistic? Or are we pushing something that's completely nonsensical? So I asked Rav Mata Frank, one of my spiritual guides in Breslov, when I was in Uman at Rabbi Nachman's kever for Rosh Hashanah. I asked him this question. I pointed out the fact that this has been the challenge. Sex, fantasy, lust, desire has been the challenge all throughout history, the biggest challenge for man. It's no different in today's times, but in today's times, we have access and it's everywhere. You see billboards with mostly naked women. So, but where's the realistic nature to all of this? What are we trying to do? I asked him, straight up, is there really a path to this? Are we just burying our head in the sand? Most 17-year-old Bachurim who have access to technology are looking at nude women. Are we going to lie and pretend like that's not happening? Do we not have a solution, so therefore we just simply don't address it and just continue to hope for the best and push for the best? What's the strategy here? And his answer was, I think, 2 or 3-fold. I have to try to remember exactly what he said. First of all, he acknowledged that the question is a poignant question, not really one that has a definitive answer. Obviously, in the ultra-Orthodox world, they shy away. They'll never have these conversations. I shouldn't say never. Who knows what will be in 30 years from now, but they're not going to have these conversations openly. Their strategy is just to push you toward personal holiness. Now, realistically, the way that the Jewish world tries to deal with it is they try to marry you off young, because one solution to this issue is get married, because if you're in a relationship, you could have sex, and hopefully through being able to get your energy out that way and deal with it that way, you could retain a certain level of personal holiness and not go down the road. But from my perspective, by that point, it's already too late. 13, 14, and 15-year-olds have access to phones. And I haven't even touched on yet the extra layer of difficulty if you're exposed to pornography from a young age. That's a whole nother issue. I hope to get to that momentarily. Marrying kids off young is an attempt to try to deal with this. And by the way, back in the day, like in the shtetl, you did marry young. You did marry at 13 years old. So you hit puberty, a year later you're married, you may never even touch this, like even close to this level of problem that we're facing these days, where you don't marry till you're older and you have all the access on the internet and everything's just, sexuality is completely normalized. Everything is sex driven. I mean, all of social media, all of advertising, everything, it's everywhere. So you can't escape it. Another thing he said was that, look, there's the mahalach, there's the way in which we go about trying to deal with it. We do have to recognize that there are exceptions to every klal, to every general statement. And he said there are times when there's somebody who really struggles with this stuff. That individual needs to speak to his spiritual guide and rabbi, and there should be ways to, offer up solutions and maybe exceptions and this and that or whatever. But yeah, obviously you can't just give anyone the green light to do anything. So the verdict was that there really isn't a real solution. Oh, he did mention, and this was the most fascinating part. There are a lot of Kabbalists and sages who believe that we are reincarnated. Most of the souls in our world today is a reincarnation from I think it was the Dar Haflaga, or what's in English called the generation who constructed the Tower of Babel. If I don't want to misquote him, but I think that's what he said, that there are a lot of people who believe that our souls are reincarnated from that time. Maybe it was a different period, but if it was, whatever. But the point was, it was a time when, in that generation, their biggest struggle that they didn't overcome was in the area of sexuality. There was a lot of sexual immorality there. Who knows, perhaps same-sex marriage, or not marriage, but same-sex sex, fornication, perhaps bestiality and stuff like that. There was a lot of sexual immorality during that period, if I'm referring to the correct one. And if that's correct, it actually sheds some light and makes sense of what's going on. In that, if we are reincarnated from that generation, and we're here to fix or correct on a personal level that problem, it would make sense that we entered into this world during a generation where that problem is extremely difficult. You following along? If we failed in a previous generation with this problem, here we are, and it's still the number one problem to overcome. Rabbi Nachman says that a person who conquers their lust and their desire for sexuality and that whole area can accomplish anything else. Meaning he admitted that it's the hardest thing to conquer, but if you conquer this, you'll have no problem conquering other things. Because all other bad habits, issues, things that you need to get over are minuscule compared to this struggle. But if we're reincarnated from that generation and that's where they failed, it makes sense that we've been put into a generation that it is like the pinnacle or hardest thing to overcome. So I found that to be very interesting, because that would explain, just from a divine perspective, why it's so seemingly unrealistically difficult to overcome. I was exposed to pornography very young, which led me in my older years to explore much deeper the effects and my sexual imprinting and something called an arousal template. You can look into this stuff, very fascinating if you're truly trying to get a grasp on this issue and overcome it. You can overcome it. You have to really understand what's going on. But part of the issue was that I was exposed to it young. The issue that I felt like I was fucked sideways 3 different ways. Pun not intended. I grew up ultra-Orthodox, so I was not taught about sex. No sex education. So I certainly didn't learn about sex from a healthy perspective. I actually also dealt with some molestation when I was young. Nothing severe. Things that I was able to heal from much younger, like when I was a teenager. But that also screwed things up a little bit. I'm not going to complain because I have friends and I know people who have really been through a lot. I was introduced to pornography at 12 years old, maybe even 11. And here's what happened. I'm standing at a bus stop, waiting for my bus to come, to go to Pupa Cheder, a Hasidic, ultra-Orthodox school. I grew up Hasidic in Rockland County, Muncie, Spring Valley. I had the side locks, the whole 9 yards. I'm waiting for my bus on the corner of Decatur. A garbage truck driver pulls up and throws out of his window a torn page out of a pornography magazine. I've never seen a woman naked. I'm 11, 12 years old. I've never seen a woman naked, never learned about sex, don't even know if I knew the difference in male, female sexual organs. I mean, but I was so sheltered. Didn't really grow up with TV or anything, so I just didn't know these things. Now, I pick up this image, and it's an image of a woman completely nude, engaging in some sex act. I remember taking that image, not knowing what it was. My heart rate was up for some reason. I knew this was wrong. Something's bad about this, right? Remember, we were in school being taught all this stuff, so like, this is bad. But for some reason, I wanted to hold on to it. I was attracted to it. I remember taking that paper, folding it up, and in my house, I don't remember if I took it to school or ran back into the house. I don't remember that part, but I will tell you one thing. I held on to that paper, that image. I folded it up, I hid it in a hole in a wall in our house, and I had it for a long time. Eventually, I was afraid that my mother or father would find it. Maybe I tore it up. I held on to that. I don't even think I reached puberty by the time I was already exposed to that. Okay, I'm using myself as an example. Like I said, I have no shame when it comes to these topics. So I'm using myself as an example to outline the layers of complexity. Look, every layer adds a whole aspect of work that you're going to need to put in to get past it, to get over it, to get control of it. Every layer matters. How long you're sheltered, when you were exposed to it, what you were exposed to, what you went through. So we start again. I had zero sex education, exposed to pornography before I even hit puberty, a little bit of molestation during my young years. And then a couple of years later, after bar mitzvah, I ended up going what they call OTD, off the path, and I was a little bit rebellious. My parents sent me away to my grandparents. I ended up living a really good life there, and that helped me in many different ways. I don't want to get into that, but the point is I had access to technology from that age. With access to technology, a computer, and internet, before that, I should say even before that, I found a porn stash by my brother. I was already fully exposed by 12, 13. I was watching porn. And then 13, 14, I'm like consistently watching porn. So think about all of those things that are stacked against me. That goes on for years. That brings me into teenagehood, a young adulthood. Everything I know about sex, I saw on the screen. There was never any education. It happens to be when I was in Washington, I was sent to public school. I was homeschooling through the public school. On Fridays, I used to go in. There may have been a sex ed class at that point at 14 years old, but I was already infected. I had already been watching porn for a year or two by that point. Every one of these variables created another layer of complexity. And the main point, I'm not trying to do a whole biography here. The main thing I'm trying to point out is that you have to understand your circumstances. For example, many people in the ultra-Orthodox world, they potentially get exposed to it older, back when we were younger. These days, younger kids have phones, but there are people who probably were not exposed to pornography until they were 17, 18, or even older, 20, 22, 24. That in and of itself has its own issues. So your circumstances, the variables that pertain to your story, your life, matter. You need to understand them from a psychological perspective, from a healing perspective. If you go to therapy, if you work on this stuff, if you talk about this stuff, whatever it is, you have to understand that every variable is a real variable that you're going to have to deal with to help navigate you out of this issue. These issues are so complex, it will take you years to navigate. Don't think that you're just going to muster up some kind of magical willpower and poof, it's gone. If you were exposed to this stuff from a young age, if it has shaped you and made you who you are, if it is tied into your nervous system and your understanding of pleasure, your understanding of novelty and fantasy and everything, you will not shape this in a night, in a week, in a month, probably not even in a year. You have to be a certain age, a certain level of maturity. You have to go through certain experiences. You have to hate it so much more than you enjoy it. There are so many stages that you need to go through, but it can be done. I was also exposed to personal prayer at 17 years old. Imagine a decade of prayer and attempting to not waste seed, to not watch porn. but never getting discouraged that I can't climb that mountain. Having periods throughout that I've accepted and allowed myself to indulge, understanding that the pursuit of trying not to was almost more devastating than the results, up and down, up and down, up and down. But through that journey, I learned the nuances and the ins and outs of this struggle. One of the things I learned was that theology alone, education alone, won't cut it. If you're addicted to something, and like I said, it shaped you from young, just hearing the rabbi say that you shouldn't do it, because in Kabbalah it says that you are creating souls every time you waste seed, is not enough. It should be enough, but it's not enough. All right, time to take off these glasses. I think it's actually giving me a headache. It's not enough. When you have sunk into such depths of fantasy, of habit, it would be like somebody doing hard drugs for 10 years straight and listening to a CD that tells you to stop doing it, and then you just magically have the willpower to stop. For most, that won't work. And the reason it won't work is because of how deep you are. So one of the things I've learned over these years of trial and error, and more in the last few years, I started to surrender and let go to the process and understand that this is not something that I'm solving overnight. So one of the things that did not connect with me, or it connected with me, I tried it and kept failing, was the spiritual teachings that guard your eyes, guard your thoughts, just don't do it, don't masturbate, don't waste seed. In Breslov, that's a huge thing. Go 40 days clean. And myself, amongst my friends and others, there's always this environment of testing that out. I went 5 weeks, I went 3 months. That never worked well with me because the cycle is very heavy. It fatigues you. It's like, here I go, I'm trying again. It's like somebody who has went on 200 dates with women trying to find their beloved, and at some point you're just like, I can't do this anymore. You know what I mean? You just leave me alone, right? So I just didn't like that challenge. If it didn't work 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, okay. But when you're just trying the same thing year after year, 5 years, 7 years, 10, like, what's the sheer? What's the end? What's that statement that like stupid people do the same thing over and expect a different result? So yes, personal prayer is powerful. Willpower is strong, so on and so forth. But it wasn't enough, not for me. For others it may be, because if you didn't sink that low, perhaps you don't need that much pulling out. So I kept exploring and I never gave up hope. I started noticing as I got older that everything, including other areas that I needed strength in, that I almost felt like I would never overcome, I did overcome, and it helped give me hope in these areas and other areas, that by being consistently close to God and talking to Him, anything could be achieved, including this. So I didn't give up hope, took it easy on myself, and worked it. Personal holiness is an amazing accomplishment, one that very few people actually achieve in this world, even amongst Jews. It's something I strive for, something I understand. I understand the value and the benefits of it. I see what it does when I am strong enough to implement. And so to me, it's important to always look for ways to do so. One of the interesting things I recently came across that was so interesting and different than anything I have come across on this topic since I learned about personal holiness at about 17 years old, so about 16 years, is something called semen retention, specifically through the lens of the Taoist philosophy. Now, this might sound weird because I'm going to touch on a philosophy that is not Jewish, has nothing to do with Judaism, but I always felt like different cultures have mastered different arts. And while I feel like Judaism has mastered the art of the art, has mastered mysticism, esoteric understanding, God, connection with God, and everything surrounding creation, more so than any other religion, I always recognized and felt like the Chinese had a very good understanding of the body and energy. And so I always explore things and pluck the good and ignore the rest. a friend of mine kept mentioning to me over the years, but I only recently looked into it, the Chinese philosophies surrounding semen retention and sex and energy. Never thought deeply into it. I didn't understand how it may benefit me or what do I even care about it. But a couple months ago, it clicked, opened up a book, started reading a little bit, and my creative brain started firing. And I said, wait, maybe this is a solution that God is sending to explore a different path. The timing seems right, and timing is everything. Certain age, certain level of clarity, a certain level of motivation, just a certain place of health. Everything has to click. Timing has to be right in all cases of human endeavor when you're conquering big things. I can't emphasize this enough, because if somebody listening to this attempts to replicate what I'm talking about, they may not feel it. So it's all about timing. As I said, this guy has been mentioning this to me for years. It didn't click. All right, so let's get into the gross aspect of this conversation. But no, truly there is nothing gross, because this is Hashem's creation. And in fact, when you learn this stuff the correct way, you'll stop thinking of these things as gross. He was essentially telling me, my friend, he's trying to explain to me, we have it wrong. Western society took sex in a very particular place. They took it to a very particular place. And this comes back to the sexual imprinting, pornography, and all this stuff. Like, we think of sex a very certain and very specific way. And it's not the healthiest way. It's not the best way. And, if you could relearn it and get into some of the deeper understandings of sex and energy and intimacy, it's so much healthier. And some of the things that he was explaining to me on the outset was that, number one, this concept of semen retention, not ejaculating. And I'm not talking about not masturbating. I'm talking about not ejaculating. No-Fap refers to, I believe, staying away from masturbation in its entirety, similar to what our Jewish leaders are pushing us to do. Create fences. Don't touch your private parts. Don't look at women. Don't masturbate. Don't waste your seed. Very simple. We know in reality it's extremely difficult to do, but the instructions are simple. But as I said, in our modern times, it doesn't seem very realistic. No-Fap, the non-Jewish version of that, is essentially telling the same thing. The willpower, the control, just stay away from it. Semen retention is a different philosophy entirely. Semen retention essentially says, don't waste your seed. It doesn't tell you don't masturbate. It doesn't tell you don't have sex. It doesn't tell, none of that. Semen retention refers to holding back, wasting your seed. I neglected to mention earlier, according to Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, when we waste seed, we are creating souls in the spiritual realm, and those souls need to be nourished or fed, and therefore they suck or they draw sustenance from you, or from your abundance, or from your allotted spiritual or divine fuel or whatever. I don't know how else to explain it. I always believe that the spiritual and the physical are very tied. So the actual physical fatigue that you feel after you waste seed and subsequently continue to feel that next day, so on and so forth, is just a physical manifestation of this spiritual concept. Hence, in the Jewish world, they're very against, or they're teaching us to not waste seed. Now let me jump back to the Taoist philosophies of sex and energy. My friend was explaining to me that there's these Chinese that they essentially have sex, but right before they're about to finish, after even having an orgasm, they just don't come. They don't ejaculate. And then he says that they do something called multiple orgasms, and they just don't finish. I thought that was wacky, weird, whatever. Some months ago, we spent Shabbos together, and he had a book, and it was called The Multi-Orgasmic Man. And the cover has this dude with his shirt off. And I'm like, oh gosh, what is this? Why is it here? Get this shit out of my sight. But he then explained it again, like, no, this is really interesting. Like, you could learn about pleasure, about energy. So since I was there for Shabbos, I opened the book and I started reading some pages. And then I realized, oh, okay, this is a whole modern twist on a real ancient philosophy, on real deep insight into the body, into energy, yin and yang, male, female, energy, sexual energy, so on and so forth. Now, it's something that I'm still learning, but I'm only mentioning it to introduce you to something that may be interesting to you, but also to the broader idea that when you believe in God and you feel like the challenge is too big or too high, but you persistently, without persecuting yourself, pray to God, request that God send you the energy, the wherewithal, and the solution to this issue, you will be surprised that God could deliver something to you that is completely outside of your framework of thought, philosophy, belief, values. He could just open you up to a solution that exists in this world that you've just never been exposed to. You could only do that through faith and if you don't self-sabotage. Now, for me personally, when I started reading this, I'm like, my bells were going off in my head. And I'm like, this is a little interesting. Maybe this could be a gateway into really harnessing the control that I'm looking for. And it's a little premature, but I do want to share that practicing this philosophy and getting into it, and I'm just really in the early stages of it, has been the most successful thing that I've tried in 15 years, the most successful. To me, that's very big. And I pray to God that I continue to have the strength and that it continues to lead down a good path. I feel very confident, very good about where it's taking me. And that's one of the reasons why I want to share it here with you today. I haven't finished learning the entire philosophies. I'm still working through it with my wife. It's males and females, very interesting. But here are the key takeaways that I already understand over the past couple of months of delving into this. First of all, what I really like about it is the notion of completely relearning. Remember I spoke about earlier, you have to relearn your understanding of sex, of intimacy. This is giving that to me in a deeper way, in a way that I more resonate with than any other things that I've read and learned up until now. Their understanding of body, flow, energy exchange, I believe is second to none. And if you're in the right place to absorb that knowledge that those ancients understood and practiced, and there are still a lot of people who practice it until this very day. As you can see, there's modern iterations of those old works being distributed to the masses. So there are individuals everywhere who consume this knowledge and put it to practice. So number one, the first takeaway is that if you're stooped in this stuff and you struggle with it on and off over the years and you're sick and tired and you want to find a solution, you have to recognize, first of all, as I said earlier, it takes time. Have patience with yourself. Talk to God. Number two, you have to relearn sex completely. By relearning what sex is, what intimacy is, you then have to take the initiative to start practicing and getting into pursuing that, not just learning it. The same way that when you try a strong drug, you get that crazy first-time high, and then you try to chase it every time. That's similar with sex and pornography. You're always chasing that fantasy that doesn't exist. By relearning sex, you have to be willing to come off that peak euphoria that you're used to, learn something more subtle and realistic, and then you can find true joy and pleasure and happiness and all of the above within that realm. Because that euphoria, that high, that peak, completely unrealistic, unhealthy, and it destroys you. So that's number one. From this philosophy, I derive the importance of completely relearning my entire understanding of sex, of semen, of energy, all of it. And learning this philosophy will teach you that. There are a couple different books. One of them, like I said, is called The Multi-Orgasmic Man. There's a book called Sexual Kung Fu, I think. There's a couple different books that really get into it. And you could easily find it. The next big thing that I learned, and this is one of the key components here, is that they teach you that there's a difference between a genital orgasm and ejaculation and a full body orgasm. Just like women have full body orgasms, men can also. There's something about the Western approach to sex that essentially programmed everybody to have genital orgasm for the man, which is followed by release. The people who practice this other philosophy know how to completely separate the two. They can give themselves full body orgasms without going to the genital orgasm and wasting their seed. This is very interesting because it flips on its head so many different faculties and functions of the way that we approach and think about what sex is, especially for the man. It also introduces so many more variables. Wait a second. Are you saying that I could have sex, experience an orgasm, and then not finish, and then potentially go back and do that again? That's exactly what they're teaching. That can be done, and many people do it. This is a benefit probably that I don't even have to mention based off of this conversation, but it's a benefit in many areas. Obviously, for your partner, it's a benefit. Sex is not so selfish, and it doesn't end a couple minutes in when you climax. You also don't waste seed, hence semen retention. But behind all of this is the most intriguing aspect, which is that you retain that energy. So the philosophy will teach you all about energy, what to do, some techniques, how to learn it, blah, blah, blah. But essentially what's happening is you're playing with your sexual energy or your energy. Your energy, there's a part, it's your energy. You're playing with your energy, arousing yourself, having an intimate moment, doing all these things. Instead of releasing it, you bring it back up to your body and you retain all that energy. And no, that doesn't result in blue balls. My first question was, what? You're messing around like that and you don't come? Blue balls? No. Which forced me to go on to, Grok or ChatGPT, and I'm right away like, look, I thought when you build yourself up and don't release, you end up with blue balls. And it turns out there's no correlation. Blue balls happens in a very specific type of scenario. You could experience sexual energy, intimacy, sex, all kinds of different feelings, build yourself up, all that stuff, not waste the seed. Take that energy back up to your brain, back into your body, and walk around with that energy. So it turns out this is a big philosophy and many people practice it. It's intriguing on another level. People who are addicted to pornography, masturbation, wasting seed, especially if they started young, have a very intimate relationship with their body, as I said earlier, that very physical low level, as well as sexuality in general. They're very sexual people. When the prospect of becoming holy by practicing personal holiness comes up, it's not just the doubt that you have that you can't actually pull off the internal strength of not wasting your seed. It's everything else that comes along with it. Like I said, don't look at women, don't fantasize, don't touch, don't play, don't this, don't. It's a bunch of don'ts. And for somebody who that is literally part of their nervous system and their emotional makeup, it's inconceivable. So when I started learning this philosophy, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. This doesn't take away your identity. If you're a sexually active person, married or not, irrelevant, and that has made you who you are, instead of this just don't, this introduces a new layer. It just says, don't waste your seed. And to me, that felt like, wow, this is an interesting first step as I'm relearning what sex is, sexual energy, all this stuff. Now there's a new route to follow. I haven't heard any new philosophies recently. This is a new philosophy. You can do all this other stuff, just don't do that. All of a sudden, it sounds a lot more realistic. I could do all this stuff, but just not do that, not finish. Maybe I could work with this. And this allows you to work backwards. Personally, I found that to be very interesting. The Jewish way is very difficult because it requires, like I said, just superhuman willpower, and it creates all kinds of struggles in the mind. And I don't even know to a certain extent how healthy it is, because when people then release and explode, they do all kinds of crazy stuff. Here, it's like not going to that extreme. It's like, here's a philosophy that you can work backwards. First of all, you can learn all this new stuff and you could read all the benefits that it's bringing. Retain your energy. Oh, don't even get me started. People talk about this when they talk about NoFap, the energy that they have. People who practice semen retention, the Taoist way, the way that the ancients taught it, understanding the energy flow and how to bring the energy up to the head, they are essentially playing with energy. And that is a very fascinating thing in its own right. You're taking energy, playing with it, bringing it up into your body, and then when you're done, you go out, you're now walking around with a certain level of energy and strength and ability that others aren't, and that you yourself wouldn't have had you finished and expelled it from your body. Very fascinating. That has nothing to do with personal holiness and not wasting your seed. Meaning, if your objective is simple personal holiness, great. This is great for that. As an added bonus, you're now walking around high energy. And if you use this philosophy to engineer working backward, you will relearn how to think about sex and pleasure without fantasy whatsoever, let alone without pornography, without any fantasy. You don't need to close your eyes, play with yourself, and fantasize. That's not what sex needs to be. So I'm not going to get into that. These things take months to learn. I'm just going to say that you can 100% relearn sex from a healthy perspective, change your sexual imprinting and arousal templates to understand healthy and engage in healthy sexual energy. You could get turned on, you could have orgasms, you could indulge in all the fine things that Hashem has created in this world without the negative aspects. Now, I know this is a little controversial in the sense that I'm sharing it as a solution from a Jewish perspective because, did I just give a green light to touch yourself? I'm not getting into any of that. I deal in reality. I know what people are struggling with. I know what I've struggled with. I know what's going on. I don't bury my head in the sand to pretend. None of that. The fact is, this is a real struggle. I've struggled with myself for many years. I've tried many things. And from all the things I've tried, this feels the most realistic. But behind this is my main point, which is that maybe this is not for you. Maybe there's another philosophy for you. My point is that there is a solution if you continue to pray. Wasting your seed is not good, both on a physical and spiritual plane. Pornography is terrible across the board, also both sides. Finding a way to harness it and take control of it is 100% the ideal thing to do. It will take you to levels of success that you've never reached before. The question is how. This entire video was all about the notion of how, or I should say the purpose of the video. I discussed many things, but the whole purpose here is the how. There are many other things that I've tried that I could discuss. I don't want to get into it. It's a whole nother episode. I'm not making away, and I could talk about the notion of guarding your lives, guarding your thoughts, rewiring your brain, not to fantasize about everything that moves. I could discuss all of those issues, all of those topics individually, because each one is an entire world. And I've gone through the years of really coming to understand and practice and learn, and I saw how it helped me. But nothing has touched me quite as deeply as this. This is an entirely new philosophy that solves so many of the issues, that allows you to work backwards instead of taking on so much up front. I will finish this off by saying that there is such a thing as healthy sex. There is such a thing as healthy intimacy. There is such a thing as learning to enjoy those things, even if you've stooped to very, very low places in pornography and fantasy. There's a way to undo what you've seen and how it imprinted your brain, how it essentially programmed you. But these things take time. One of the main things that you will have to do that does require willpower, that, a new philosophy can't help you with, is the self-control to stop watching pornography. There's a possibility that a new philosophy can motivate you, could get you started, could help you feel like it's a half a compromise. But at the end of the day, you have to pray to God for strength to have the self-control not to go on pornography. If you solve pornography, as we discussed, it's its own issue and addiction, and you're then left with trying to deal with personal holiness, semen retention, or not wasting seed, then the second part of this discussion, the discussion we just had about philosophies and the ways, is more realistic. Take this from me and from many men our age that I speak to. This is a huge issue that so many deal with. Most are too embarrassed to talk about it. That's perfectly fine. I understand why. Do not feel like you are alone, and know and believe with a complete faith, an innocent faith, that Hashem could solve this for you. You just have to keep desiring it and requesting it. If you do so, for some people it's 3 years, for some people it's 6 years, for some people it's 9, for some people it's 30 years. You don't decide when you're ready. Your soul, your body, your intellect, everything in Hashem, all in one, comes to a place where it clicks. With Hashem's help, with God's infinite grace, it clicks for you sooner than later. And I wish you all the best Thank you. Peace and love.
Leave a like and subscribe.